Okay, who knows what we talked about 2 weeks ago? You weren't here, so you're off the hook. Okay, we talked about nutrition and epigenetics, and we're going to review a little bit tonight. And then last week we talked about exercise and epigenetics. And so tonight we're moving into the third law of health, which is water. And so I mentioned in the first meeting on this topic, on the laws of health and epigenetics, I mentioned that I believe that we can find all 8 of these principles within the first 2 chapters of the Bible. And so tonight's is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 6 and 10, and I think, did I put that in here? I don't remember if I put it in here, so I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. Okay, Genesis 2:6, but there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground, in verse 10. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. So we know that we have to have water to drink, and I don't think Adam and Eve were any different. So their water came from what? It came from this river, from the springs and rivers that were naturally in Eden. We're going to talk about why that's important tonight. So in our first talk on this topic, we mentioned 2 physicians, Dr. T. Colin Campbell and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who had done research where they were able to turn off the epigenetic switches for disease. In other words, people might have genes that leaned them toward cardiovascular disease or cancer or what have you, but because of their ability to change the diet around, they were able to show that you can turn off that gene for cancer, you can turn off that gene for heart disease by the way you choose to eat and live. And then we talked last week, we introduced the concept of gene methylation. That's where you have that carbon and 3 hydrogens, and that's what attaches in different places along our DNA that actually turns those switches off and on, is that gene methylation. Okay, and then we talked about the end caps on our sneakers. What's that called? The end caps on our chromosomes. Does anybody remember that word? You're not supposed to talk, I know you know. You know the answers. You've heard me do this before. So he gave it away. Yes, those little end caps on the end of our telomeres, which you see the chromosome in the background, and then on the very end, and you can see it better on this picture, in the pink there, that would represent the telomere, which is simply a repetition of genetic information, so that every time this thing divides, when it loses a little bit of genetic information, it doesn't come unraveled, and this also helps to keep the chromosomes from fusing together on the ends, because sometimes if that happens, that can cause mutations. And so God was very smart. He put these little end caps of repetitive gene information. The shorter those little end caps get, what happens?
Shorter life.
Anybody remember? Besides you? If your telomeres get too short as your cells divide, that means it doesn't have much life left. And we mentioned last week that scientists can actually look at the length of telomeres on people's chromosomes and guesstimate roughly how much longer they have to live. But there's things that we can do that can lengthen those telomeres. And last week when we talked about exercise, we discovered that exercise was one of the things that we can do to lengthen that end cap of genetic information so that the cell will last longer. So tonight we're going to talk about another thing that can lengthen those telomeres. All of these principles of health that we're talking about in this series are going to help lengthen those telomeres, lengthen your cell life, and thus your overall life. So, did you know that your genes, your chromosomes, cannot function without the medium of water? If you're dehydrated, your genetics are going to be goofed up. you're not going to be able to properly methylate, as we talked about last week, and it can cause the cerebrospinal fluid. It won't activate the DNA and the RNA via this methylation process. And our neurotransmitters function in an environment of water as well. Everything that happens in our bodies, you would not be able to blink if it weren't for water. You wouldn't be able to swallow. You wouldn't be able to move your bowels or clean your kidneys. You wouldn't be able to do any of that if it weren't for water. Okay, 75%, and I personally believe that this is an understatement. A shocking 75% of Americans are actually operating in a state of chronic dehydration. I would venture to guess that it's more like 95%. Seriously. And I don't know if I put it in this slide or not, so I'm going to mention it here. Between the ages of 20 and 70, the intracellular fluid, intra means inside, so inside our cells we have fluids. You're going to discover some pretty amazing things tonight. It's going to be a paradigm shift in your thinking. If you've ever been to the doctor and been told, watch your salt, watch your, you're going to have swelling in your feet, we're going to totally blast that theory tonight. Okay? So bear with me. It is going to be a paradigm shift, but I will explain with the science. And that's why I'm sharing the science in the Bible, because I want solid ground under your feet for the changes that I'm inviting you to make in this series. So the fluid inside the cell between the age of 20 and 70 lessens by half. And if you don't have enough fluid inside your cell, it's not going to have the electrical energy that it needs to carry on its processes. Okay? So please water your genes, and we're going to do that tonight. And I'm going to help you understand how to properly hydrate. I have many people tell me, oh, I drink 3 quarts of water a day. Just had a lady today. No, I drink 3 quarts a day. Are you doing salt? No. When you sweat, what does it taste like? Have you ever tasted your sweat? It tastes salty. So when you sweat, you need to replace more than just water. You need to replace your electrolytes. And we can do that with salt. And if you don't do that, your intracellular fluid is going to go extracellular, and you're going to end up with swelling in your feet and other places too. All right? Dehydration increases cortisone activity, and cortisone is a precursor to cortisol, which is our stress hormone. This elevates inflammatory cytokines. You've heard of cytokines with the COVID thing. Everybody was going into cytokine storm, and that's what was killing people. These inflammatory cytokines can be nasty, but they're there for a reason. Okay, so we do, that's part of the way God made us. It's just when things get out of hand that it's bad. And whenever your inflammatory cytokines go up, this causes fragments in your DNA. Your DNA actually breaks and becomes very fragile. So you're not going to have proper genetic expression. Your telomeres are not going to be lengthened. Your DNA is not going to be strong. Your genetics are not going to be strong. Also, as dehydration progresses and those cortisol levels continue to rise, and the body is trying its best to get the fluid inside the cell, but the more dehydrated you are, the harder that becomes, the body releases something called vasopressin. Has anybody ever heard of vasopressin? Years ago, when I used to work in the unit, they were transitioning, I believe, from vasopressin to epinephrine. Whenever somebody went into cardiac arrest, epinephrine was something that we would give to kind of help restart things. Vasopressin used to be used in the algorithm. Vasopressin helps to raise your blood pressure. So if you're dehydrated and the body is doing everything it can to get that water inside the cell where it needs it in order for your body to function properly. So if that vasopressin is trying to get water inside the cell and it's having to push so hard, what do we call that? We call that hypertension. Okay? That's where hypertension a lot of times comes from. Here's some more statistics. The body is 75% water from here down. from the neck down. From the neck up, it's more like 85%, and some people say even higher than that. Stomach mucus is about 99% water. And I'm going to introduce you to a physician tonight, and his stories will amaze you. The blood is about 98% water, and Leviticus 17:11 says that the life of the flesh is
Blood.
in the blood. Okay, I'm going to show you a little video right now that I found online. This is very interesting, and this will be very real to Mom because we did this with her, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. So let's watch this video.
Of water affects human blood. The doctor is drawing blood from a patient's finger. Using a special microscope, we shall be able to see the condition of her body from this drop.
These are red blood cells, and they've lost their electrical charge, so they're all stuck together in a formation called a rouleau. Here's a huge symplast. Symplasts are associated with heart disease and arthritis and lung disease and many other conditions that could be coming in the future.
The doctor asks the patient to drink a small amount of structured water. After 12 minutes, the doctor again draws blood from the patient and studies it.
So you can see that the cells then become buoyant,
Big
they
difference.
become slippery, and they have their electrical charge, so they repel each other. That allows them to carry oxygen, and it means that we're changing the pH of the blood back to an aerobic environment rather than an anaerobic environment. I think that's utterly amazing that just drinking water could do that.
So it's also changing the blood from acid to alkaline. If your blood is more acidic, you're not going to be healthy. You're not going to feel well. You're going to have a lot of pain. You might even have a heart cramp that some people call angina, but it's largely just from dehydration. Okay? Now, sometimes when I talk about these things, I get the deer in the headlights look from people. But I worked for 16 years in nursing. I started out, I cut my teeth in cardiovascular nursing. I worked in critical care, I worked in trauma, and I've seen a lot of these things firsthand. And so I know what this looks like out there in the allopathic world, and I know the thinking processes in the allopathic world. Now, I'm not telling anybody here tonight to stop their medication or anything like that. I'm simply going to ask you, if you are on medication for some of these things, consider changing your lifestyle. See what happens. Talk to your doctor. Maybe you can get off of some of those medications. This blood right here, Mom, does that look familiar? That was once inside of you. We did this very thing. I took Mom down to my chiropractor down in Bismarck. I paid $20 for this finger stick, which was before I had Mom drink some structured water. And then this was 10 minutes later after I had her drink structured water, and then I had her hold this structuring device in her hand for about 10 minutes, and then we tested her blood. What this device does is it helps to put the proper electrical charge in her cells so that they repel one another. Now, how much oxygen can this blood carry as compared to this blood? You see how much more surface area this blood has. Now, I'm not going to get in too much to structured water tonight, but again, structured water basically puts the proper electrical charge into the cell, into the water in the blood, so that it's actually more hydrating, it's anti-inflammatory, and it gives you more energy. Okay, we're actually going to be doing a Zoom meeting with the inventor of this device, hopefully in about a week or two. So we'll have more information on that here in just a little bit. I read Genesis 2, 6 and 10 a while ago. Structured water is actually sometimes called H3O2. So there's an extra hydrogen there, which is what gives it that extra electrical charge. You might also hear this called magnetized water, hexagonal water, or EZ water. That EZ stands for exclusion zone. There's a little section inside of our cells, that has this structured water in it, and the body can make its own structured water if you get out in the sunlight, which is what we're going to talk about next week. So I've often told Kaylin, when I'm out laying in the sun, I feel like a little solar panel, like I'm recharging myself. And as I've been researching this, I have found out that that is exactly what's happening. So that's actually true. Dr. Gerald Pollack, who's an expert on structured water, he said that structured water acts like a power source that can help us to stay more hydrated. And natural springs, which is what we had in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, where did they get their water from? These natural springs. They didn't have wells. They didn't have municipal water. The water came up from the earth, and there were rivers and springs and things. Okay? Let's talk about the thirst mechanism, because people tell me, I'm still got water in my mouth. I'm not thirsty. I'm okay. You know, I had a guy one time, he came to help us on our property. This is before I married Kaylin. And he was a big guy, big muscular guy, real strong guy. And he would just sweat like crazy. And he wouldn't drink a thing all day. And I would take him a bottle of water and say, David, you need to drink something. Still got water in my mouth, I'm good. And he wouldn't drink anything. Do you know that man had schizophrenia and was on medication for that? I found out later that schizophrenia is caused largely from dehydration. So I think if he had rehydrated himself, it would have helped a lot. So in an individual who is relatively well hydrated, the thirst mechanism is functioning properly. So you can actually tell when you actually need more water. But if you're chronically dehydrated, your thirst mechanism is broken, and you don't actually realize when you're thirsty. As I was researching for this again, I did this talk several years ago, but as I was researching this again, I realized that I had really gotten a little bit slack on my water drinking. So I really hit it again, and I've been purposely doing the water and the salt. And I cannot tell you how much more clear my thoughts are, how much better I feel, how much less pain I have from the things that I'm exposed to, that, you know, you all know about the mold and stuff. So often if somebody's thirst mechanism is broken, they can actually misinterpret thirst signals for hunger signals. So they eat when what they need is water. And digestion takes water. It takes a lot of water to digest food, so then they become more dehydrated. Okay? If you're forgetting to drink, remember that all Alzheimer's patients suffer from chronic dehydration. If you know somebody who has Alzheimer's, see if you can get them to drink and take the salt. Most people can tolerate a 3 to 4% decrease in total body water loss without difficulty or adverse health effects. 5 to 8% decrease can cause fatigue and dizziness. The doctor that I'm going to introduce you to tonight believes that chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and a lot of these things are directly linked to dehydration, as well as other pain syndromes. Loss of over 10% of total body water can cause physical and mental deterioration accompanied by severe thirst, and death occurs at a loss between 15 to 25%. And this time of the year, we all know, is a little bit more dangerous. We need to be a little bit more proactive. Chronic dehydration can cause histamine to become excessively active. This may result in symptoms that may be mistaken for other disorders like asthma, allergies, dyspepsia. I'll tell you a story about that. I think it's in the next slide. Colitis, constipation, rheumatoid arthritis, chronic pains in various parts of the body, especially migraine headaches. Dyspeptic pain, which can range from simple heartburn to severe gastroesophageal reflux disorder, or GERD, may be one of the early signs of dehydration. But just drink water. You know, that's the take-home message tonight. And we're going to talk about the proper way to drink water in just a minute. But dyspeptic pain, which again can range from simple heartburn to GERD, may be one of the early signs of dehydration. If you have dehydration, 75% of your upper body weight rests on this fifth lumbar disc down here in your low back. If you're dehydrated, that disc right there can really cause you some problems because so much of your body weight rests on that one disc. Cartilage also gains more wear and tear when you're dehydrated. So if you got knees, you got shoulders, whatever, it's going to get a lot more wear and tear. Let's look at some signs of dehydration. Some of these might surprise you. Fatigue. Why do I have those pop cans in the back?
For the sugar.
Because they're very dehydrating. Soda pops are extremely dehydrating. In fact, some people say, excuse me, that if you drink one soda pop, you need to drink 32 glasses of water to counteract the acidity of that one soda pop to bring your body back into balance so that you're in the safe zone. How many people drink 32 glasses of water every time they drink a can of pop? Nobody. They reach for another can of pop. Okay, so here's some signs. Fatigue. Anybody have difficulty focusing these days? Okay, chills, sugar cravings. Nobody here has that. Irritability, anxiousness, bad breath, asthma, lightheadedness, poor sleep, muscle pains, back pains, hypertension. Here's some more. Morning fatigue. You're very dehydrated in the morning. Okay? Feeling flushed and an intolerance to heat. Depression. You have a low serotonin. Again, your neurotransmitters. You have to have water to make the neurotransmitters. Feeling heavy-headed or foggy-headed. All signs of dehydration. Stomach pain and gastric ulcers. Water is the medium of transport to deliver nutrients to the cells and to take out the waste from the cells. So if you don't have enough water to wash those things away, anybody ever had to go in one of these things? You can smell it now, can't you? They're stinky, aren't they? You know why? Because there's no water to wash away the waste. It's just chemicals masking all that. And so when you're dehydrated, that's what your body has to do. It has to use I think it's amino acids to kind of help, and antioxidants to try to cover up the stink, so to speak, because you're so toxic. We need to bathe inside. All bodily processes take place in the medium of water, and if this water is polluted, then you're going to have incorrect pH, incorrect electrical charge, and our DNA will not function properly. So if our DNA is not functioning properly, certainly our methylation and all these epigenetic changes that need to take place for us to be healthy are not going to function properly either. Hydration is essential for the proper functioning of our genes. Our DNA needs to be in a very specific shape in order for its instructions, which are encoded in the genes, to be decoded. Water surrounds our DNA and supports that structure, which is the characteristic double helix that we see, and I'll show you in the next slide. Without that shape, cells would not be able to decode the instructions nor pass them on to future generations, and ultimately that could lead to extinction, which I don't believe the Lord is going to let that happen. When we're dehydrated, there's not enough water. Again, I mentioned this with the porta potty picture. There's not enough water to flush out the waste, so the body uses, amino acids as antioxidants, and then your amino acids become depleted. Your proteins are made from amino acids, so you're going to become protein deficient. Whoever thought protein deficiency could be caused from dehydration? And DNA is made from amino acids. Now, here's the doctor that I wanted to introduce to you. Most people either call him Dr. B or Dr. Batman, but it's Dr. Batman Geheldig. Batman Geheldig, I think is how you say it. This is a direct quote by him. He has a book called Your Body's Many Cries of Water. I have that book. It's a fantastic book, but it's in Alabama, so I couldn't bring it tonight for you to look at. He said pain unexplained by injury or infection is directly linked to dehydration. In fact, he was a political prisoner in Iran. He's Iranian. I think it was back in the early 70s. He's a political prisoner. He was in there for, I think it was 2 or 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And the only thing that he had to treat his patients was water. He had one man who was severely just doubled over in stomach pain. He had this gastric pain. Just the man could not even hardly breathe. He was hurting so bad. Well, all Dr. B had to give him was water. So he gave him 2 glasses of water, and in about 15 minutes, the guy sat up straight. He gave him another glass of water. 30 minutes later, he was completely fine. In his time in the prison, that's all he had to treat patients. He treated over 3,000 individuals in that prison. Anybody want to guess what his success rate was?
80%.
What'd you say?
80%.
Anybody else?
93.
93? 100%.
No way.
100% success rate.
Wow.
And that was what started him on the trajectory of studying water, because he was limited. All he had was water to give people. So when he got out of prison, he thought, I have got to study this. And so he devoted the rest of his career to studying water. And if you look him up on Wikipedia, he's considered to be a quack. Okay? What that means probably is he was on the right track.
That's exactly right.
If, right. So many people tell me, but I drink 8 glasses a day. And so I'm fine. But are you replacing your salt? It's like this elephant is balanced on this ball. It's a balance between the water and the salt. And so we're going to do our experiment now. I gave everybody a little cup of salt. I don't want you to put water in that. We have a pitcher here and I need a volunteer. But what I want everybody to do is put that salt under your tongue. Throw it back, put it under your tongue. Okay, who wants to volunteer to be my pitcher person? Okay. Okay, put the salt under your tongue, and then I just want it to sit there a little bit. Then everybody take some water. Somebody grab the pitcher. I'm going to nominate somebody. Okay, give everybody some water if you don't have water. The reason I want you to put that salt under your tongue, let it dissolve, is because that's going to absorb more of the minerals right into your mouth. Okay, that's going to go directly into your bloodstream a little bit faster. If you dissolve the salt into the water, then it's already going to be saturated. You're not going to absorb it as well. You will still get some. But if you need more than 1 cup of water, that's fine. But when you take the minerals in the salt with the water, it puts it inside the cell where it needs to be. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Here's what happens. We lose, I don't know if you can see this, but we lose water through sweat. And so the body furnishes the sweat glands from the bloodstream. Okay, so then the bloodstream doesn't have enough water, so the blood takes it from the tissues. The water shifts from the tissues into the bloodstream. And then fluid shifts from the cells into the tissues. So our cells end up depleted. So whenever we replace that water that we sweat out, if we don't give back the minerals that we lost, can the body get that water into the cell? No. So we have to have the salt with the water. Now, again, I used to work in nursing. I left my career to do natural remedies. Yes.
You're talking table salt, right?
Yes, I'm gonna talk about that. This is not table salt. Well, since he mentioned it, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about that now. This is what's called Celtic. Actually, this one right here that I gave you is called Colima salt. This is a hand-harvested sea salt from Mexico. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's a very nice salt. It's a salty salt.
How do you spell that?
Colima. Most people use Celtic or the pink Himalayan salt. Celtic has a few more minerals than the Himalayan salt. The Colima, I don't remember exactly how many this one has. I did research it at one point. But it's comparable to the Celtic salt. And it's hand harvested. If you use just table salt, you're getting 2 minerals, sodium and chloride. And you know what that is? To your body, it's poison. You should go home and throw away your sodium chloride and never use it again unless you need to kill slugs in your garden. It's very good for that. But get the mineral salt so that your body is getting the minerals that it needs to put the water where it needs to be. Has anybody ever had this? What is that called? Does anybody know? What's that called? Edema. You see that? You see the little pits in that guy's ankle or lady, whoever? When you become dehydrated, the cell membranes become less permeable and sodium levels outside the cell rise. The cells must have nourishment to survive, and the body responds to this decreased permeability by trying to force the water into the cell, which we mentioned earlier is by vasopressin, and that is called hypertension. Now, what are most doctors going to do when you're diagnosed with hypertension or edema or something like this? They're going to take you off salt and they're going to limit your water intake. Exactly the opposite of what you need. And this is why Dr. Batman Geheldage was ostracized basically from the medical community. That's why they consider him a quack. But it's a paradigm shift that works. I've seen it. It works. Okay? So the doctor's probably going to put this person on diuretics and restrict their salt intake. Low salt diets can contribute to hypochlorhydria. Does anybody know what that is? Low stomach acid. Now, most of the time when people have this reflux, they think they have too much stomach acid. But exactly the opposite is true. You don't have enough, because the level of stomach acid in the stomach is what signals, when you have sufficient stomach acid, it's what signals that sphincter at the top of the stomach to shut. And if you don't have enough stomach acid, it never gets that signal and it stays partly open, so that what acid you do have refluxes back up. So if you will drink and take your salt, that sphincter will close. Your body will be able to make the stomach acid that it needs.
I use Himalayan salt. Does that have enough minerals?
The Himalayan salt, the pink salt, yes. The Celtic salt is probably a little better, but the pink salt, I would much rather you use that than table salt. Table salt, again, is poison. You should not use that.
I don't.
Yeah, but the pink salt is good stuff. Minerals such as magnesium, zinc, copper, selenium, manganese, chromium, molybdenum must pass through stomach acid in order to be absorbed. So a low salt diet can contribute to mineral deficiency. So these things have to pass through the stomach in order for your body to take them up. And if you don't have enough stomach acid because you're dehydrated, or because the doctor put you on Pepsid or the purple pill or what have you, okay? So this is a paradigm shift, and I understand, it's a little scary as a patient to consider this, but in my experience working with people, this works. It does work. This is another quote from Dr. B. Basically, there's two oceans of water in the body. One ocean is held inside the cells of the body, and the other is outside the cells. Good health depends on a delicate balance between the volumes of these two oceans. Most of us have too much in the spaces between the cells, which is extracellular, and we're dehydrated inside the cells. When we're dehydrated inside the cells, they don't have the electrical charge that they need, and we're not going to have the energy that we need. Our cells are not going to function properly. So this balance between these two oceans of water is obtained by drinking enough water and adding a moderate amount of salt. And I'm going to talk about how much salt in just a little bit. Okay, and also by eating a variety of potassium-rich fruits and vegetables. So a diet rich in leafy green vegetables is going to give you a lot of minerals along with the salt. Okay, what about bladder control? Nobody in here has problems with leaky bladder, but we're going to talk about those people who do. People drink dehydrating beverages. When you drink a cup of coffee, for instance, it takes out not just that cup, but an additional 30 to 40 cc's of water with it. So when you drink a cup of coffee, you're putting yourself in water deficit. Okay? Salt is essential for smooth muscles to be strong. And Dr. B, in his book, gives the testimony of this lady named Dorothy Lee Reed. She actually had to take, she was delivered parts. So she was in her vehicle driving around town all day long. And she had to take 2 or 3 changes of clothing because she would wet herself. She couldn't control her bladder. And so she got his book, or she heard one of his lectures actually, and she started increasing her water and salt. And within 8 days, her problem was completely reversed. Completely reversed. She didn't have any more problems with her leaky bladder. So here's Dr. B's recommendations: drinking half your body weight in ounces of clean water each day and dissolving or putting under the tongue an 1/8 teaspoon of unrefined, like we have here, natural salt before each 16 ounces of water that you drink. For every quart of water, you need a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And again, this is not table salt. If you're taking table salt, you're going to end up like that person with the puffy ankles that we saw, because your fluid is going to be between the cells and not inside the cell. But if you're using this correct salt, it's going to put that salt inside the cell where it needs to be. Okay? Also, if it's hot, like it's hotter right now, you may need a little bit more salt. Okay? Or if you're on a heavy meat diet, you're probably going to need a little bit more salt. Okay, so drinking water without adequate salt and potassium intake will not correct dehydration. I have people tell me all the time, as I mentioned earlier, I drink 8 glasses of water a day. But if you're not replacing the salt that you lose salt in your breath. We lose water and salt in our breath. We lose it from our kidneys. We lose it from our bowels. Okay, all these different ways. When we blow our nose, if we cry, if we sweat. So we have to replace not just water, but we have to replace those minerals that we've lost too. And the best way, minerals are salty. Okay, they're salts. Potassium in the diet comes from fruits and vegetables. And salt should be, again, either the Celtic or the Himalayan salt. And I like this Colima salt, Colima. Okay, connecting to last week, walking hydrates the spinal discs and the joint spaces and aids in pain reduction. So if we want to get water into our cartilage, into our joint spaces, mild, gentle exercises and drinking the water and stuff is going to help with that. So this evening's talk was about water. And next week, we're going to talk about sunshine, and we'll tie these talks together. The Bible says in Psalm 36:9, "For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light." So today we talked about the fountain of life being water, and next week we're going to talk about this light. And what was the light that God made initially? It was the sunlight. Okay, so we're going to talk about sunlight and how it charges our batteries next week. So is there any questions or comments?
How come I see commercials on Facebook, through Facebook and all that, they say for those of us that are diabetic, we should not be drinking cold water.
Well, I've never heard that, but you know what I did hear Dr. B say today?
What?
He said that diabetes type 2 this was him saying that, okay? Diabetes type 2 is dehydration of the pancreas. That's a powerful statement. He also said that diabetes type 1 can largely be helped, perhaps not reversed, but largely helped by proper hydration. So he also said that many of the autoimmune diseases that we see today could be largely helped, if not reversed. He made a lot of statements in that talk today, and if anybody wants to listen to that talk, it's almost 2 hours. So, and it's not too highbrow. I can send you the link, and I'll put the link in the video description when I put this on YouTube.
What's the name of his book, Tom?
The name of his book is Your Body's Many Cries for Water. Your Body's Many Cries for Water. It's a very well-known book. and it's got quite a bit of research and evidence. You know, it's not just, and you know, I when I first read that book, I thought, I know I need to drink water, but this sounds a little far-fetched. But I've put it to the test. I've had probably 20 years to put it to the test, and it works.
Wow.
It definitely works. So, and I've tried it on myself. You know, I remember one time when Kayla and I still lived in Kentucky. I don't know if you remember this, honey, but for about a week I moaned and I belly ached and I griped. I had a horrendous headache and I just rolled in the bed and held my head. I couldn't believe how bad my head felt. And then it hit me. I hadn't been drinking enough water. So I went and I drank a big glass of water. I felt a little bit better. And I went and I drank another big glass of water, and my headache was gone that I had struggled with for a whole week. So, you know, I've tested this in myself too. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, can you take too much salt? Well, the better salt we're talking about.
Can you take too much salt?
But then
Yeah.
you hear about high blood pressure, too much salt.
Yeah.
I
See,
feel that.
and that's the paradigm shift that we have to wrap our mind around. When we take the proper amount of salt, which we mentioned, you know, that little bit that I gave you is a fraction of what you need every day. Okay. These if you get the coarse grain Celtic or Colima or pink Himalayan salt, you can just take 1 grain each time you drink a 16-ounce glass of water, put it under your tongue, let it dissolve. Your body is going to absorb those minerals, and that's going to push those the water that you follow that with into the cell. So if you follow the recommendation that he had, which was 1/4 teaspoon of water per quart, 1/4 teaspoon of salt per quart of water that you drink, unless it's super hot and you're sweating a lot, you know, and that kind of thing. My husband, when he's out sweating and everything, you know, a lot of people like this Gatorade and these rehydration drinks. It's very bad. Does it have high fructose corn syrup? I can't remember. I meant to look that up, but I know it's got all kind of
It works
excitotoxins.
against us really bad.
Yes.
They promote it as it's supposed to help.
It's
you.
not
It
healthy.
is deterrent.
It is not. There. In fact, let me give you a recipe for a rehydration drink that is healthy. If you take a quart of water, put a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of honey, and you can try if you're really dehydrated. Use the 1/2 teaspoon. If you're not really dehydrated, you can get away with a 1/4 teaspoon in a quart of water and 1 teaspoon of honey, and mix that up. And that's going to give you it's going to give you a little bit of energy from the sugar. It's going to give you the minerals from the salt, and of course the water, and it's going to put it right into the cell. But see, everybody's afraid of hypertension when they start taking this salt, but hypertension is caused from lack of salt and water, okay? Yes, there's other causes. There may be some mechanical obstruction, but by and large, you know what essential hypertension means? They don't know where it's coming from. Well, duh. Your cells are dehydrated. They're croaking of thirst. So if we give them what they need, the body won't have to raise vasopressin so high to push the water into those cells, which puts back pressure on the system, which increases your blood pressure. That's what it's all about.
But our doctors never explain this to us.
Of course not. It doesn't make money. Salt's cheap. How many cows you know have hypertension? I mean, serious. But when I was a kid growing up, of course I did this when we first got the salt licks. I didn't always do it after the horses had licked. But we always had salt licks out for our horses and cattle, you know. And I loved licking those things. It had minerals in it too, you know. And the horses are out there licking that and drinking water and licking that.